For an entire century, the car industry was pretty simple to understand. You had Germany, Japan, and the US at the very top. Names like Mercedes, Toyota, Ford, they weren't just companies, they were practically national treasures. But that world, it's gone. That 100-year-long dominance isn't just fading, it's collapsing. And it's happening at a speed that is just shocking. What used to be totally unthinkable is now the brutal, day-to-day reality for all these legacy car makers. Take Mercedes, right? The absolute titan of German engineering. They watched their profits just crater, down by nearly a third.
And then there's Porsche, the icon of luxury and performance. They lost 92% of their bottom line in a single year. It's just unbelievable. And they weren't the only ones. Volkswagen started announcing massive job cuts. Stellantis posted losses in the billions. The old guard was bleeding out. And every time one of these giants stumbled, one name kept popping up. BYD. A company most of us couldn't even name 5 years ago. A company that, get this, wasn't even making cars until 2003. They were just making simple batteries. So how on earth did a small battery workshop bring the titans of the auto world to their knees?
Well, the official story, the one you'll read in all the business magazines, is that it was a masterclass in strategy. And to really get it, you have to know the man who built this whole thing, Wang Chuanfu.
So, back in 1995, Wang was this 29-year-old engineer who started a little battery workshop with a $40,000 loan. By 2003, he's the biggest battery maker on the entire planet. And then he does something that nobody, and I mean nobody, understood. He bought a totally bankrupt car factory. His investors freaked out, the press called it a joke, but Wang's logic was actually pretty simple. He was convinced the future of the car wasn't the engine, it was the battery. And who knew batteries better than him? So while the rest of the world was laughing, including Elon Musk, by the way, on live television, Wang just quietly made 3 brilliant decisions that laid the groundwork for total domination.
First step, total vertical integration. While Tesla was buying its batteries from Panasonic and Volkswagen was juggling hundreds of different suppliers, BYD decided, you know what, we're just going to build everything ourselves. Not just the batteries, but the semiconductors, the motors, the electronics, even the headlights. So when that global chip shortage hit and paralyzed the entire industry, BYD, they just cranked up their own factories and kept shipping cars like nothing happened.
His second big bet was on, well, the boring option, plug-in hybrids. While everyone in Silicon Valley was obsessed with pure electric vehicles, Wang knew that for hundreds of millions of people in China, outside the big cities, where there are hardly any charging stations, a hybrid was the only choice that made sense. This compromise basically gave BYD access to a market of 500 million consumers that Tesla couldn't even touch.
And the third decision? That's what closed the trap. In 2020, BYD released its Blade battery. It used a cheaper, safer chemistry, lithium iron phosphate, that didn't burst into flames when you punctured it. This amazing innovation let them sell cars for less than Tesla, while also claiming they were actually safer. And the final irony? 4 years later, Tesla started buying batteries from BYD to put in its own cars.
And that, right there, is the official story. Brilliant founder, revolutionary vision, vertical integration, smart market strategy, breakthrough tech. It's a great story, a real underdog tale. But it's not the whole story, not even close.
Because here's the thing, from day one, BYD wasn't playing the same game as everybody else. They had a silent partner. A partner with basically unlimited resources. Between just 2015 and 2020, BYD got about $4.3 billion in direct subsidies from the Chinese government. Now, let me put that into perspective for you. In 2016, the subsidy checks BYD got from Beijing were worth more than the company's entire net profit. I mean, without the government just writing those checks, BYD wasn't just less profitable, it was actually losing money.
And the help wasn't just cash, it was free land for factories, zero-interest loans from state-owned banks, huge tax breaks. It was guaranteed government contracts to build entire fleets of city buses and taxis. And on top of all of that, there were direct subsidies to car buyers, which meant every single BYD sold in China came with a nice prepackaged discount, courtesy of the state. Some analysts figure BYD was pocketing up to $4,000 of public money for every single car it sold.
So here's the crucial point. Western car makers aren't just competing with a company, they are competing with a country. BYD is basically the chosen champion for a national strategy called Made in China 2025, a plan that very openly stated China's goal was to dominate the global car industry.
BYD could sell its cars below cost for years and still report a profit because the state was just quietly making up the difference. But now, after all these years of explosive state-funded growth, some cracks in the empire are starting to show. And it's making some people wonder if this whole miracle is maybe a little more fragile than it looks.
A report from GMT Research landed like an absolute bombshell. It suggested that BYD's real debt isn't the 42 billion yuan they report, but it's closer to 323 billion. That's almost 8 times higher. So where's the missing money? Well, it's hidden in this thing called supply chain financing. Basically, BYD is paying its suppliers on average 275 days after they deliver the parts. That's 9 months. For almost a year, they're using all these small companies that supply their parts as an unpaid bank to fund their own operations.
Then you've got this practice of zero-mileage used cars. To hit their monthly sales targets, dealerships are registering thousands of brand new cars to fake shell companies that they control, and then they sell them on the secondhand market. On paper, it looks like a new sale, but in reality, these cars are often just abandoned in giant fields, literally rusting away. It raises a really awkward question. When BYD says it sold millions of cars, how many were actually sold to real people?
At the same time, all these quality and ethical problems are starting to pile up. You've got massive recalls for steering defects and fire risks, thousands of complaints on Chinese social media about faulty electronics, and in Brazil, the labor ministry is actually prosecuting BYD for conditions at its factory that were described in court documents as analogous to slavery, with things like confiscated passports and 14-hour workdays.
And eventually, all this stuff starts to show up in the financials. For example, in the first quarter of 2024, net profit dropped 19% year over year, and global sales in that same period, they fell by a staggering 41%. The pressure is getting so intense that even Beijing has put out a public warning that this price war just isn't sustainable.
So what does all of this actually mean? Look, none of this is to say that BYD is going to collapse tomorrow. It's still a massive company. But to understand the real game here, we need to zoom out a bit.
Because here's the most important takeaway. Whether BYD eventually crashes under its own debt or becomes the next Toyota of the 21st century, it's almost irrelevant.
The bigger story is the playbook itself. The whole strategy of massive state subsidies, creating these national champions, and protecting the home market, that's already being copied. And you don't even have to guess which industries are next. Beijing published the list. We're talking about aerospace, semiconductors, green energy tech. The BYD model is going global.
The story of BYD was never really just about cars. It's a blueprint for how to dominate a global industry in the 21st century. And it's a strategy that fundamentally changes all the rules of competition. The only question left now is, which industry is next?